The Zorvath Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds, from the frozen moons of Varkish to the molten seas of Kethar Prime. No species had ever withstood their might. When their fleets arrived, planets surrendered before the first shot was fired. Resistance was futile. So when the Zorvath High Command received reports of a newly discovered pre-FTL civilization in the Sol system, they barely paid attention. Another weak, primitive species waiting to be subjugated. Another planet to add to their growing collection. A single fleet was dispatched, 50 warships strong, armed with weapons that had shattered planetary defenses in mere hours. The invasion was led by Lord High Admiral Craxus, a veteran of countless campaigns. As his fleet dropped out of hyperspace beyond Pluto, he looked upon the blue-green world with amusement. "This is Earth," he mused, his voice laced with disdain. "Their defenses are non-existent." His bridge officers chuckled. Their scanners confirmed what they already expected. No planetary shields, no orbital defense platforms, just a handful of satellites and a few primitive space stations. The Zorvath commander leaned forward in his chair, activating a system-wide broadcast. His image appeared across every screen on Earth, his reptilian eyes gleaming with arrogance. "People of Earth," he said, his voice translated into dozens of languages. "I am Lord High Admiral Craxus of the Zorvath Empire. Your planet is now under our dominion. You will surrender immediately and pledge loyalty to the Empire, or we will raze your world to the ground." The transmission was met with stunned silence. Across the globe, panic erupted. Governments scrambled to respond. Military leaders stared at the sky, knowing they had no fleet, no means to fight an enemy with technology centuries ahead of their own. On the bridge of his warship, Craxus smirked. This was how it always went. The conquered always hesitated, paralyzed by fear. Then they begged. Then they bowed. But something was different this time. The humans did not respond with pleas. They did not kneel. They went silent. And then, something changed. A new transmission cut into the Zorvath broadcast. The image of Craxus flickered and was replaced by the cold, steel-gray interior of a warship's bridge. A human stood at the center, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. His presence radiated a quiet confidence. "I am Captain Elias Rains of the HSS Aegis," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Your fleet is trespassing in Sol space. Leave immediately." Craxus scoffed, leaning back in his command chair. "Amusing," he chuckled. "You believe a single vessel can stand against the Zorvath Empire." "I believe," Rains replied, his gaze steady, "that you have made a grave mistake." The transmission cut. Craxus sneered. "Fools." He turned to his weapons officer. "Target that ship. Erase it from existence." The order was given. The first shot of the invasion was fired. And in that moment, the Zorvath Empire had no idea that their reign of terror was about to end. The void of space trembled as the first Zorvath plasma lance streaked toward the HSS Aegis, a searing spear of white-hot energy capable of vaporizing warships in a single blast. The bridge crew of the Aegis held their breath. Their shields, untested in real combat, flared to life, absorbing the impact. The ship shuddered, but it did not break. Captain Elias Rains remained still, his hands clasped behind his back, as he stood at the command dais. The Zorvath were testing them, expecting them to flinch, to panic, to fold like every other species before them. He had no intention of giving them that satisfaction. "Damage report," he said. "Shields holding at 76%. Lieutenant Caravas responded from the tactical console. "No hull breaches." Rains nodded. "Then it's our turn. Target the lid cruiser. Fire at will." From the Aegis underside, missile silos slid open. Railguns whirred to life, their magnetic coils crackling with energy. A moment later, the ship unleashed hell. Missiles surged forward, weaving through space like predatory birds, while hypervelocity slugs tore through the void faster than the eye could track. The Zorvath flagship, a towering behemoth of dark metal, barely had time to react before impact. The first salvo struck its shields, causing them to ripple violently. The second punctured through. The third detonated inside its hull. The once mighty warship, meant to lead the conquest of Earth, erupted in a chain reaction of fire and debris. Silence fell across the Zorvath fleet. On board his command ship, Lord High Admiral Craxus lurched forward in his chair, his slitted pupils dilating. "Impossible," he breathed. One ship took down a cruiser. It was supposed to be a slaughter. Instead, it was an embarrassment. He snarled, fury overtaking his shock. "All ships, advance. Tear them apart." The fleet surged forward, 50 warships strong, each one a colossus of destruction. Plasma batteries charged, torpedo bays opened, and energy weapons glowed with the fury of 1,000 past conquests. On the bridge of the Aegis, Captain Rains remained eerily calm. The odds were impossible. The enemy fleet was overwhelming. And yet, a small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Helm," he said, "engage Phantom Drive. Let's show them what real warfare looks like." The Aegis flickered and then vanished. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. The Zorvath fleet fired wildly, their shots slicing through empty space. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Then, without warning, the Aegis reappeared behind them. Its railguns opened fire, shredding another Zorvath cruiser before it had a chance to turn. Missiles surged forward, splitting off into swarms of death. Another warship exploded. The Zorvath, used to crushing enemies through sheer might, had never encountered anything like this. A lone warship that fought like a ghost, striking and vanishing before they could retaliate. Panic set in. Craxus watched as another of his ships was torn apart. He clenched his jaw, hands curling into fists. This is not possible. But it was. And for the first time, the Zorvath began to fear. The Zorvath were no strangers to war. They had crushed entire civilizations, burned cities to ash, and forced countless species to kneel before them. Never, not once, had a single ship defied them. And yet, here was the Aegis, an anomaly in their long history of conquest. One warship, one crew. And already, 2 Zorvath cruisers were nothing but wreckage drifting through the void. Lord High Admiral Craxus bared his fangs, rage seething in his reptilian blood. "Enough of this," he growled. "Concentrate all fire on that ship. I want it reduced to dust." Orders were relayed instantly. The remaining Zorvath ships adjusted formation, their weapons tracking the Aegis' last known location. Plasma lances fired in blinding salvos, slicing through space in brilliant arcs of destruction. Torpedoes streaked forward in waves, programmed to lock onto any movement. The Aegis vanished once again. Craxus' claws dug into his command chair. Where did they? Then it reappeared, this time beneath his fleet. The Zorvath barely had time to react before a barrage of railgun fire tore through the lower decks of a battleship. Explosions bloomed across its hull, fire and debris spewing into the void. "Damn them!" Craxus roared. "Adjust targeting. Cut them off." This time, the Zorvath were ready. As the Aegis flickered and began its next maneuver, a battleship preemptively fired a gravity well mine, a specialized device designed to disrupt enemy movements. The device detonated, sending a shockwave rippling through space. On the Aegis, warning sirens blared. "Captain, they've disrupted the Phantom Drive." Lieutenant Voss called out. "We can't jump." Captain Rains gritted his teeth. The Aegis was fast, unpredictable, but now it was vulnerable. The Zorvath fleet closed in, firing relentlessly. The warship shuddered under the assault, its shields flaring dangerously. Incoming torpedoes. The bridge lights flickered as a series of explosions rocked the ship. The deck trembled, and Rains caught himself against the command railing. Smoke filled part of the control room as emergency crews scrambled to extinguish the fires. "Shields at 29%, Voss reported, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't take another direct hit." Rains exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The Zorvath thought they had them cornered. They thought this battle was already won. That was their mistake. "Helm, bring us about," he ordered. "Target their command ship." His bridge crew hesitated, charging straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. It was suicide. But they trusted him. The Aegis turned sharply, accelerating toward the largest warship in the Zorvath fleet, the flagship of Lord High Admiral Craxus himself. On the Zorvath bridge, Craxus' slitted eyes widened. "What are they?" Before he could finish, the Aegis unleashed everything it had. Plasma beams sliced through the enemy shields. Hypervelocity slugs from the railguns tore into the flagship's hull. Missiles detonated across its surface, ripping apart armor plating and exposing vital systems. The Zorvath flagship, the might of the Empire, the vessel that was supposed to oversee the conquest of Earth, was burning. Craxus snarled, gripping his command chair as his ship shuddered under the onslaught. "How?" On the bridge of the Aegis, Rain stood tall, watching the chaos unfold. He could feel it. The Zorvath were breaking. And this was only the beginning. The Aegis hurtled through the void, weaving between the debris of shattered Zorvath warships as explosions illuminated the battlefield. The once invincible fleet was reeling, its formations shattered, its flagship burning. But even wounded, the Zorvath were still dangerous. A swarm of enemy fighters broke off from the main fleet, their sleek, insect-like frames darting through space. They zipped toward the Aegis like a cloud of angry wasps, their plasma cannons charging. "Enemy strike craft inbound," Lieutenant Caravos called out, her hands flying over the tactical console. "They're targeting our engines." Captain Elias Rains barely hesitated. "Deploy point defense turrets. Fire at will." The hull of the Aegis bristled as automated turrets swiveled into position. Streams of rapid-fire railgun rounds spat out in all directions, filling space with deadly projectiles. The first wave of Zorvath fighters was torn apart, their remains spinning into the void. But more came. Too many. "They're overwhelming the defenses," a crewman shouted. Then came the next blow. A lucky plasma torpedo slipped past the flak screen and struck the Aegis aft section. The impact sent a violent shudder through the ship. Sirens wailed. Consoles flickered. "Direct hit on the aft stabilizers," Voss shouted. "Engines compromised. We're losing speed." The bridge trembled as another explosion rocked the ship. This time, it wasn't an external hit, it was internal. Fires erupted on deck. Crew members scrambled to contain the damage, but the situation was spiraling out of control. Rains gritted his teeth. They had pushed too hard, too fast. The Aegis had delivered more destruction than anyone thought possible, but now they were running out of time. The Phantom Drive was disabled, their defenses strained, and the Zorvath were closing in. They needed a miracle. A thought formed in Rain's mind, a plan so reckless, so utterly insane, that it might just work. "Lieutenant," he said, turning to Voss, "what's the status of the main cannon?" She hesitated, then checked her display. "The coilvan's intact, but we don't have the energy to fire a full power shot. The reactor's barely holding together." "That's fine," Rain said. His expression darkened. "We don't need full power. We just need one shot." Voss stared at him for a second, then realized what he meant. "You want to fire inside their formation." "Not just inside," Rain said, pointing at the tactical display. His target was clear. "We're taking the shot right through their command ship." A hush fell over the bridge. The Zorvath fleet was regrouping, moving to encircle them. If they didn't act now, they'd be overwhelmed. Rain stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "Helm, plot an attack vector. Take us right down their throat." The bridge crew exchanged glances. It was madness. The Aegis was already struggling, its hull scorched and bleeding atmosphere from multiple breaches. Charging headfirst into the enemy's heart was suicide. But they had come this far. They had defied the odds. And if they were going to die, they were damn well going to take the enemy with them. "Aye, sir," the helmsman said, setting the course. The Aegis roared to life, its remaining thrusters burning at full capacity. It surged forward, dodging enemy fire, weaving through the chaos of battle. The Zorveth, still underestimating the humans, hesitated. They had expected surrender. Instead, they got a vengeful predator. Craxus saw the movement and realized, too late, what was about to happen. "Stop them," he roared. "Destroy that ship." But the Aegis was already in position. "Fire," Rains commanded. The coil gun hummed. Magnetic rails crackled with energy. A single tungsten round, the size of a small car, launched from the Aegis prow at incredible speed. The Zorveth flagship never stood a chance. The slug punched through its shields, carved through its reinforced hull, and exploded out the other side, ripping through 3 more warships in its path. The force of the impact triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. A moment later, the flagship, the symbol of Zorveth dominance, detonated in a brilliant explosion. Silence fell over the battlefield. For the first time in history, the Zorveth knew fear. The Zorveth flagship was gone. What was once a towering symbol of their empire's dominance was now a drifting wreck, its shattered remains scattered across the void. The explosion had been so violent that it had taken 3 escort ships with it, their hulls torn apart by the shockwave. And yet, the battle was far from over. On the bridge of the Aegis, Captain Elias Rains barely had a moment to register their victory before new alarms flared. The warship shuddered violently, warning lights flashing across every console. "Status report." Rains barked. Lieutenant Kara Voss wiped soot from her forehead, her fingers flying over the tactical display. "Hull integrity is at 20%. Rear thrusters are failing. Shields are completely down." She swallowed hard. "Captain, we're barely holding together." Rains gripped the railing, his mind racing. The Aegis had struck a decisive blow, but the Zorveth fleet still had numbers. Even with their flagship destroyed, their remaining ships were regrouping, trying to salvage control of the battle. Craxus was dead. That much was certain. But his second-in-command, a cold, calculating strategist named Commander Vornak, had already seized control of the remaining forces. From the bridge of the surviving Zorveth battleship, Vornak's reptilian gaze burned with fury. He had just watched the Aegis dismantle their invasion force with a level of defiance he had never seen before. It enraged him. "We still outnumber them," Vornak snarled. "The human ship is crippled. Surround them. Overwhelm them." Zorveth warships tightened their formation, moving in for the kill. On board the Aegis, the crew braced for the inevitable. They had fought beyond anyone's expectations, had turned the tide of battle against impossible odds. But now, they were out of tricks, out of weapons, out of time. And yet, Captain Rains refused to surrender. "Open a fleet-wide transmission," he ordered. A communications officer nodded. A moment later, Rains' voice carried across the Zorveth ships. "This is Captain Elias Rains of the HSS Aegis," he said, his tone level but unyielding. "Your flagship is destroyed. Your fleet is in disarray. You came to this system believing Earth would bow without a fight." His gaze hardened. "You were wrong." Silence stretched across the battlefield. The Zorveth warriors, so used to instilling fear, now felt it creeping into their own ranks. The human warship should have been annihilated, and yet it still stood. Then Rains delivered the final blow, not with weapons, but with words. "We are not some weak, defenseless world waiting for conquest," he continued. "We are humanity, and we will fight. If you continue this battle, we will not stop. We will not break. We will hunt you down, no matter where you run." A murmur rippled through the Zorveth fleet. Crews aboard the remaining ships exchanged uneasy glances. They had lost too many already. Their leadership was gone. And this lone human warship, battered but unbroken, still dared to stand against them. Commander Vornak hissed, his claws scraping against the command console. He could see it, doubt creeping into his officers' faces. Stay the course. He snapped. Destroy them. But no one moved. And then, one by one, the Zorvath ships began to turn away. Vornak's eyes widened. What are you doing? I gave an order. The response came from his own officers, their voices shaken. The fleet is retreating, Commander. The Zorvath Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, was in full retreat. And for the first time, humanity had proven that they were not prey. They were predators. The battlefield, once a maelstrom of fire and destruction, had grown eerily quiet. The Zorvath fleet, fractured and leaderless, began its desperate retreat. One by one, their warships activated their jump drives, slipping into the void like frightened animals fleeing a predator. On the bridge of the Aegis, Captain Elias Rains watched their departure with cold, calculating eyes. His ship was barely holding together. Hull breaches vented atmosphere, sparks rained from damaged consoles, and the crew worked tirelessly to contain the worst of the damage. But despite their condition, they were still standing. A cheer erupted from the bridge crew, a cry of victory that echoed through the ship's battered hulls. They had done the impossible. A single human warship had defeated an empire's invasion force. But Rains was not celebrating. Lieutenant Voss, he said, his voice calm but firm. How many Zorvath ships remain in system? Voss checked her console, her elation fading. 16 warships still in range, mostly battleships and destroyers. They're running, sir. Rains nodded. Weapons status. She hesitated. Railguns are down, and our missile reserves are depleted. We have enough power for a few plasma volleys, but barely. The captain exhaled, then turned to his comm officer. Open a channel to the fleet. A moment later, his voice carried across the system. This is Captain Rains of the Aegis to all retreating Zorvath vessels. Your invasion has failed. You entered our system believing us to be weak, believing that we would kneel. His voice darkened. Now you run, like cowards. Silence. The Zorvath still in system heard every word, their reptilian pride stinging at the insult, but none dared to turn back. Rains leaned forward. You should know something about humanity. We do not forget. Then, in a quiet, lethal tone, he added, and we do not forgive. He gestured to Voss. Fire at will. The remaining energy reserves of the Aegis surged through the plasma cannons. Streaks of white-hot energy lashed out, striking the retreating battleship dead on. The ship's shields collapsed instantly, and an instant later, the hull ruptured, splitting apart in a violent explosion. Another shot took down a fleeing destroyer, then another. The Zorvath ran faster, their ships jumping into the void with reckless urgency, terrified of what this single human warship might still be capable of. Rains finally allowed himself a slow breath. Ceasefire. The bridge crew, once cheering, now stood in stunned silence. They had won, but their captain had made something clear. This was not just a battle. This was a message. The Zorvath Empire had come to Earth expecting easy conquest. Instead, they had found something far worse. A species that did not break. A species that, when threatened, did not surrender, but struck back with a fury unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Rains turned to his crew, his voice softer now. Begin damage assessment. Contact Earth Command and report our status. And get me an open line. To whom, sir? The comm officer asked. Rains' expression hardened. To every damned species in the galaxy. The universe needed to know. Earth was not weak, and humanity was just getting started. The Aegis drifted in the aftermath of the battle, its once pristine hull now a patchwork of scorched metal and glowing breaches. Deep inside the ship, engineers worked frantically to stabilize power levels, seal ruptured bulkheads, and bring critical systems back online. The crew was exhausted, battered, but victorious. Yet for Captain Elias Rains, the battle was far from over. Sir, Transmission channels are open, the comms officer reported. Rains nodded, stepping forward. This message wasn't just for Earth. It wasn't just for the remnants of the Zorvath fleet fleeing with their tails between their legs. It was for the entire galaxy. He straightened, his voice unwavering. This is Captain Elias Rains of the HSS Aegis, speaking on behalf of humanity. Let this broadcast serve as a warning to any empire, any tyrant, any conqueror who looks upon our world with greed. His gaze was like steel as he continued. The Zorvath Empire came to our doorstep expecting submission. They came in arrogance, believing themselves superior. And today, a single human warship shattered their invasion. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. Humanity does not seek war. We do not crave conquest. But if you come for us, if you dare to threaten our home, we will respond with unrelenting force. The Zorvath learned this too late. His voice darkened. Let the rest of the galaxy be wiser. The message was transmitted system-wide, not just to Earth Command, but to any listening posts beyond. Every species with access to deep space communications would hear it. A moment later, an alert flashed across the tactical display. "Sir," Voss said, her voice hushed, "we're receiving responses." Rains narrowed his eyes. From who? The comm officer swallowed. Multiple sources, independent colonies, smaller factions, even a few neutral planets that never dared defy the Zorvath before. Rains exhaled slowly. The Zorvath had ruled through fear, crushing opposition before it could rise. But now, the fear was shifting. Others were realizing the Empire was not invincible. Another message came through, one from Earth Command. The Admiral's face appeared on screen, his expression unreadable. "Captain Rains," he said, voice level, "you've done the impossible today. You've defended Earth. And you've sent a message to the stars." Rains remained silent, waiting. The Admiral's eyes hardened. But make no mistake, the Zorvath will not let this stand. They will return, not just with an invasion fleet, but with their full military might. The bridge remained silent. The weight of the words settled over them all. Rain's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready." A slow nod from the Admiral. "Reinforcements are on the way. Return to Earth for immediate debriefing. The Aegis will be repaired and upgraded." He leaned in. "Because next time, Captain, we won't just be defending." A flicker of understanding passed between them. They weren't just going to wait for the Zorvath to return. They were going to take the fight to them. Rains straightened. "Understood, sir." As the transmission ended, a quiet energy filled the bridge. They had survived the first strike. They had defied the Empire. And soon, humanity would show the galaxy what came next. The battered but victorious Aegis limped through the void, its hull scarred by battle, its systems barely holding together. But within its steel heart, a fire burned brighter than ever. Captain Elias Rains stood at the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching as the last of the Zorvath ships vanished into the abyss. The so-called conquerors had fled like frightened prey. The mighty empire that had once scoffed at Earth's defenses had been humbled by a single human warship. But this was just the beginning. "Sir, Earth Command is hailing us again," the comms officer reported. "Patch them through," Rains ordered. The main display flickered, revealing the stern face of Admiral Jonathan Stroud. Behind him, the command room was alive with frantic activity. Earth's military had been preparing for a prolonged planetary siege, expecting to fight a desperate battle for survival. Instead, one ship had changed the course of history. "Captain Rains," Stroud said, his voice carrying a weight beyond simple admiration. "Your actions today have sent a message to the stars. The Zorvath Empire is wounded, and the galaxy is watching." "They'll come back," Rains said, his expression unyielding. "With more ships, more weapons. They won't make the same mistakes twice." Stroud nodded. "That's why we're not waiting for them." A quiet hush fell over the bridge. The Aegis will return to Earth for repairs and refitting, Stroud continued. But that's just the first step. We're mobilizing. We're expanding our fleet, arming our colonies, forming alliances. His gaze darkened. Humanity will never be caught unprepared again. Rains exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Karavos. She gave him a small, knowing nod. The message was clear. They weren't just going to defend Earth. They were going to strike first. This war isn't over, Rain said. It's just getting started. Stroud's lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. Then let's make sure the Zorveth never forget what happens when they challenge us. The transmission cut, and silence settled over the bridge. Then, slowly, something changed in the air. The exhaustion of battle gave way to something else. Determination. Helm, Rain said, his voice steady. Set a course for home. Let's get this ship patched up. The Aegis turned, its damaged engines firing as it charted a course back to Earth. But everyone aboard knew they wouldn't be resting for long. Word had already spread beyond their system. Other races, long oppressed by the Zorveth, had heard the impossible. A single human warship had torn through an Imperial fleet. Some would want to fight alongside them. Others would fear them. Either way, humanity had shattered the illusion of Zorveth invincibility. No longer were they an insignificant backwater species, ripe for conquest. They had proven something far more terrifying. They were a species that refused to kneel. A species that adapted. A species that, when threatened, became the predators. As the stars streaked past the Aegis, Captain Rains allowed himself a final thought. The Zorveth had wanted war. Now, humanity was bringing it to them.